What's up, and welcome back to another OSRS item review slash buyer's guide, where we talk about various items in OSRS and how worth it they are to buy, and when a player should buy them, where they're useful, and just how they generally hold up to like value for their price point. I want to say that a few of the videos on this series have recently have gotten quite a few views, which is kind of cool to see. It's gotten a fair amount of support, which is awesome. I just want to say, if any of you have any ideas for items that you want me to talk about, leave those in the comments below. Like, I don't really care about becoming like a YouTuber or anything, so I'm not going to tell you to like and subscribe to the channel, but I am like a big OSRS nerd with like, who's been sitting on a max bang for a couple years now, so I feel like I do have the insight to offer if people are a little uncertain as to like where the items should be in their progression. There's a lot of items in the game. It's going to take me a lot of time to get to like a lot of them, but if you like put in the comments that you're looking at a particular one, I'll probably get to it sooner. And this Elysian, for example, that we're talking about today is one of the items that was suggested. So this is everyone's, notorious, super expensive item that's like really a big luxury item. Like Oda Block loves to stack these up because like they're just so valuable. It's the Elysian Spirit Shield. Like, you're probably a little bit familiar with this thing already. And the reason you're probably familiar with it is because of this number right up here. 713 million GP is currently the price point of the Elysian Spirit Shield. It is a 1 in 4,000 drop from a boss that is really hard to kill solo and mainly designed for groups to kill. So as a result, it's a boss that's pretty tough to take down. A 1 in 4,000 drop. This thing is exceedingly rare, which has a lot to do with its price point. It is, however, also very powerful. It is a damage negating shield. The Elysian Spirit Shield, on top of having a very, very solid defensive stat line, also has a passive effect where 75% of the time it will negate 25% of the damage that you take. 70% of the time. Not 75, 70% of the time. So overall, it results in 17.5% overall damage reduction just by wearing the shield. That's pretty massive, and that does work in PvP, which is crazy. So that has a lot to do with why this shield is so valuable, and it's also one of its main use cases. I guess let's go ahead and get into the use cases now. So when it comes to a shield that negates damage in a game where nothing else does that, and there's quite a few settings where you take damage, obviously everywhere that you're like taking damage, the Elysian could be argued as a useful item. Now, as we progress further and further down the list of these places where you take damage, it will get more and more memey, for like a meme basically, for us to mention the Elysian in the same breath as that boss. Dagannoth Kings is essentially on here as an illustration of that point. If you are really bad at Dagannoth Kings and have more GP than you could possibly know what to do with, then the Elysian Spirit Shield is something that you could take there to help keep yourself alive. It would be a really bad option, basically. There's DPS options that are better. Like, the same thing goes if I would have put Nex on here, if I would have put, like, various other bosses on here, kind of like that, where you do take damage. I wanted to just off the top say Dagannoth Kings is not a serious location to take an Elysian Spirit Shield. It is just an illustration of the fact that this is a damage negating shield in a game where nothing else negates damage. So as a result, like, if you found yourself in a very niche situation where you were learning Dagannoth Kings, for example, then you might take your Ellie with you, but you're probably not learning Dagannoth Kings like before, like after you have the bank that supports an Elysian Spirit Shield. So that's why this item gets kind of funky sometimes in terms of where we talk about it. But as we move up the list here, we get into more serious use cases. Kraken is like obviously a boss that's never going to justify a 700 mil item. But the Elysian Spirit Shield is really useful at Kraken because if you get hit for a 1 on the Ellie and the passive activates, it reduces the damage to 0. So at Kraken, the Elysian Spirit Shield actually reduces your damage taken by like 50% or something crazy. It's obviously a very minor boss, but it's an illustration of how the Elysian Spirit Shield is a very like luxurious luxury item if you can afford it. The Corporeal Beast is a use case that I have listed on here. I will say, though, that this one kind of falls in the category of a meme as well, because a Dragonfire Shield is usually a better option than an Elysian Spirit Shield at Corporeal Beast, never mind the fact that it is much, much cheaper. The fact of the matter is, it slows down your Corporeal Beast kills to drop the 2 max hits that you do by switching from a Dragonfire Shield to an Elysian Spirit Shield. So as a result, a lot of people like who have Ellies do take them to Corporeal Beast, but I'm not a fan of it. I have an Ellie. I still take a Dragonfire Shield to Corporeal Beast because I'm of the opinion that it's better. But there is an argument for using it at Corporeal Beast, so I had to mention it. These first 4 use cases are the main 4 use cases for the Elysian Spirit Shield. If you are God Wars Dungeon tanking, if you are doing Inferno, if you are doing Colosseum, or if you are doing a lot of PvP. Alright? So God Wars Dungeon kind of falls in the same category as Kraken, where it's like, it's not quite as egregious. Those bosses do have some value. There's some GP per hour to be made there, and they do all have really rare pets. So God Wars Dungeon tanking isn't a negligible use case at all. The number one place where I use my Elysian Spirit Shield personally is when I'm doing Dolo Bandos, and it's on my alt. So I will say that if you're doing a lot of God Wars Dungeon pet hunting, especially with like multiple accounts, the Elysian Spirit Shield is potentially really useful there. Like if you have an alt that's tanking for you, you can put this on the alt and it'll take 15% less damage. That's huge. So yeah, it's definitely useful in that setting. Insofar as it can justify such an expensive item. Now, Inferno, Colosseum, and PvP. You'll see down here in the next section that PvP, Colosseum, and Inferno are, in my opinion, what come closest to justifying the price point, because these are 3 very important and potentially very valuable pieces of content. If you are somebody who does a lot of anti-PKing or tanking or some type of like unskulled PvP, the Elysian Spirit Shield is potentially a really good item for you. Obviously 15% damage reduction is like massive, but it does in anti-PKing situations come with like, you know, it's a bit of a red flag for you to be carrying an Elysian. I would say the main situations where it's useful are situations where you're mainly trying to escape. So if you're trying to like do Deathless Revs, if you're trying to do like Wilderness Agility, if you're trying to do like tanking and tanking at the Venonata Slayer, for example, all of these type of situations are where the Elysian really shines. And if you are just unskulled anti-PKing, you can get a lot of mileage out of it there as well. As much as like, you know, that your attackers are probably gonna like comment on the fact that you have an Elysian, I guess, for whatever that's worth. So yeah, it's really strong in PvP. I'm trying to drive that home. In my opinion, there are like there are only 3 categories of people in OSRS who should really own an Elysian. And those are people who do a shit ton of Inferno, or people who are doing their first Infernal Cape and have a ton of money and want every edge possible. Now that first group, I will say, is a stretch, because you do not need an Elysian to get your first Infernal Cape whatsoever. And it is like hardly going to be the difference maker in whether or not you get a cape or not. A Crystal Shield is really strong. It just doesn't have this passive. This passive probably over the course of a run isn't going to make the difference between you living or dying. So you don't need it for your first Infernal Cape, but that is a category of people that I will say has a case for owning an Elysian. It's people who have a shit ton of money and are sending their first Infernal Cape and want every edge possible. The second category of people who can like reasonably own an Elysian, in my opinion, are people who do a ton of PvP. People who, you know, are going to be in unskulled PvP situations, and for some reasons are going to want to have an Elysian in PvP situations from time to time. And that situation, totally justified, because the Elysian in PvP is a frickin' monster. And then the last group of people are people who basically have every other useful item in the game. And are at the point where they can say, okay, I want something that costs 700 mil to help me tank God Wars Dungeon. Okay, fair enough. I have everything else, so it's like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and buy it at that point. That's the last category of people that I would say really has like a good case to own an Elysian. If you don't fall in one of those 3 categories, maybe you have some argument for yourself that I haven't thought of, but I would say that 700 mil could potentially be put towards more useful things for you, and you could consider selling the Elysian to put that money towards those things, I would say. I will say at PvP, Colosseum, and Inferno, I say these come closest to justifying the price point because they're very important pieces of content, but at Colosseum in particular, the Elysian Spirit Shield does not make a very big difference, because when you're rotating pillars, people generally want to have a Din's Bulwark over an Elysian Spirit Shield because it has more range defense on it. So that's important. And also, but the Elysian still had, like, you would still take an Elysian to wear with, like, your Inquisitor's Mace, but you would only have this on while you're taking down the Ranger and the Fremennik Warband, and then you would take it off for your Twisted Bow or your Scythe. So it really doesn't make a big difference at Colo. Its role at Colo is pretty niche, but it does have one there. PvP and Inferno, though, I would say at the end of the day are the main two use cases. Because in Inferno, this thing does help you tank a lot of hits, both at waves and at Zuck. And in PvP, I mean, just 15% damage reduction over your opponent is insane. Insane. So if you're ever in a situation where you're going to be okay with taking this into a PvP situation, then yeah, it's definitely something that you'll want to consider having. So that is the long story short for the Elysian Spirit Shield and how this luxury item fits into the economy for like the average player in terms of use cases. I hope that was helpful, and like I said, leave any comments if you want to hear about any specific items. I'll see you.